The strangest thing about saving someone's life is that you almost never realize you're doing it until it's already too late to turn back. The rain hammered against the tall windows of Bellagio's Italian bistro with the steady rhythm of impatient fingers tapping on glass, turning the streets of downtown Chicago into a blur of silver reflections and red brake lights. Friday nights were always loud, always busy, always exhausting. But storms like this made people linger longer over wine and dessert, which meant bigger tips if I smiled enough and kept pretending my feet didn't ache. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 24 years old, and I had mastered the art of balancing 6 dinner plates while ignoring the fact that my student loans were growing faster than my savings account. Working double shifts as a waitress wasn't the future I'd imagined when I started college, but life has a strange way of rewriting plans without asking permission. I adjusted the black apron around my waist, tucked another loose strand of blonde hair behind my ear, and carried a tray of fresh espresso toward table 12. The warm scent of roasted coffee mixed with garlic, fresh basil, and expensive cologne drifted through the dining room, while soft jazz floated from hidden speakers above polished walnut beams. Couples laughed quietly beneath hanging lights. Business executives celebrated another successful deal. Somewhere in the kitchen, a chef shouted an order in Italian before the clang of stainless steel swallowed his voice. It looked like any other Friday night. It should have been. Then the front door opened. Nobody announced his arrival. Nobody needed to. Conversations softened almost by instinct as a tall man stepped inside wearing a charcoal overcoat darkened by rain. He moved without hurry, yet every person near the entrance unconsciously shifted aside, creating space before he even reached the hostess stand. He wasn't surrounded by noise. He carried silence with him. His dark hair was brushed neatly back, tiny drops of rain catching the warm lights above. Sharp green eyes scanned the restaurant once, calm and unreadable, before settling on the private dining room in the back. Behind him followed 4 men dressed in tailored black suits, each carrying themselves with the effortless awareness of people who never ignored an exit or a reflection in a window. I had served celebrities before, professional athletes, politicians, wealthy investors who liked reminding everyone they were wealthy. None of them changed the atmosphere the way this man did. Even without knowing his name, I could feel power following him like an invisible shadow. "Emily," my manager whispered beside me, his voice suddenly careful. "Private room. VIP guests. Be professional." I nodded, although something already felt wrong. Not because of the man who had just entered, because of the 3 customers sitting near the rear hallway. They had arrived nearly 20 minutes earlier, ordered nothing except black coffee, and hadn't touched a single cup since. One kept checking the old silver watch on his wrist every 30 seconds. Another stared toward the emergency exit instead of the stage where a pianist quietly played old American classics. The third sat perfectly still with both hands beneath the table. They weren't talking anymore. They were waiting. I delivered 2 cappuccinos to another table before glancing back. Still waiting. One of them looked toward the rain-covered alley visible through the narrow window beside the exit door. Then he nodded almost too slightly to notice. My stomach tightened. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe too many late nights had turned ordinary people into suspicious strangers inside my tired mind. But every instinct I had learned from years of watching customers told me something didn't belong. As I picked up another tray, I noticed a white linen napkin lying near the entrance where the tall stranger had walked moments earlier. Folded inside was a small embroidered crest stitched in dark green thread, elegant enough to belong on an expensive family heirloom rather than restaurant linen. Before I could wonder why it had been left behind, I heard my manager call my name again. "Emily," he said with a smile meant only for customers. "Table 14. They requested you." I looked toward the private room where the mysterious guest had just disappeared. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, the 3 silent men finally stood up at exactly the same moment. I tried to focus on balancing the tray in my hands instead of the uneasiness growing in my chest, but instincts are stubborn things. They whisper long before logic catches up. I carried 2 glasses of sparkling water and a bottle of imported mineral water toward the private dining room, forcing the practice smile every waitress learns after enough difficult shifts. The polished wooden door stood half open. Inside, the mysterious guest had already removed his overcoat, revealing a perfectly tailored navy suit that fit him like it had been designed for no one else. He sat at the center of the table while four associates quietly discussed numbers, shipping schedules, and business meetings in calm, measured voices. Nothing sounded illegal. Nothing even sounded unusual. Yet the room felt heavier than the rest of the restaurant, as if invisible rules existed here that everyone understood except me. I stepped inside, placed the glasses carefully in front of each guest, and reached for the bottle. As I leaned forward to pour, the man lifted his eyes from the conversation. For only a second, our eyes met. His were an unusual shade of green, calm but alert, like someone who noticed details other people missed. There was no arrogance in his expression, no forced intimidation, only awareness, the kind that made me suddenly conscious of every movement I made. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice carried the faint trace of an Italian-American upbringing softened by years of business meetings and discipline. "You are welcome," I replied before stepping away. It should have ended there. Instead, as I closed the door behind me, I glanced toward the rear hallway again. The three men had disappeared from their table. Their untouched coffee cups remained exactly where I had left them, still full, growing cold beneath the dining room lights. My heartbeat quickened. Customers never left untouched coffee unless they planned to return. I looked toward the emergency exit. Empty. Then I noticed one small detail that made my stomach sink. The exit door had not fully closed. A narrow strip of rain-soaked darkness showed through the gap. Somebody had opened it recently. "Emily," my manager called from across the dining room. "Can you bring another bottle of Barolo to the private room?" "Of course," I answered automatically, but my attention stayed fixed on the hallway. Every nerve in my body urged me to walk away, to finish my shift, to mind my own business. That was the safe choice. That was the smart choice. Yet I could not ignore the feeling that the quiet outside the back entrance sounded wrong. Restaurants always had noise. Delivery trucks, passing traffic, kitchen staff taking out trash. Tonight, there was only rain. I picked up the wine bottle and walked toward the private room again, slower this time. As I passed the hallway intersection, I caught movement through the slim window beside the exit. Just a reflection, or so I wanted to believe. Then lightning briefly illuminated the alley. Three dark silhouettes stood perfectly still near the loading dock, partially hidden behind a delivery van. They were not sheltering from the storm. They were watching the back entrance. My breath caught. They never looked toward the dining room. Their attention stayed fixed on the exit door as though they expected someone important to walk through it at any moment. Suddenly, everything fit together. The untouched coffee, the synchronized watches, the silent waiting. This was never about dinner. It was about timing. My hands tightened around the wine bottle until my knuckles turned pale. I could walk away, tell myself it was none of my business, finish my shift and go home. But if I was right, someone inside that private room was about to walk straight into whatever those men were waiting for. I took one slow breath, steadied my trembling hands, and reached for the handle of the private dining room door. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, careful not to let the wine bottle tremble in my hands even though my pulse had become impossible to ignore. The conversation inside continued without interruption. One man discussed investment properties along the lakefront. Another reviewed next week's travel schedule. Everything sounded polished, controlled, almost painfully ordinary. Yet I could still see those three silhouettes in my mind, standing motionless behind the rain-soaked loading dock. My instincts refused to let the image go. I walked toward the table and gently placed the bottle beside Vincent Moretti's glass. One of the men reached for it, but Vincent raised a single finger without looking away from me. The gesture was subtle, respectful, silent. His associate stopped immediately. Vincent studied my face for a brief moment, his expression calm, although something behind those green eyes suggested he had already noticed that something was different. "Is everything all right?" he asked quietly. It was a simple question, one any polite customer might ask, but somehow it felt like he was asking far more than that. My mouth suddenly felt dry. I looked toward the others around the table, for experienced businessmen, for men who watched every room before sitting down. If I spoke openly and I was wrong, I would embarrass myself, interrupt their meeting, and probably lose my job. If I stayed silent and I was right, I would spend the rest of my life wondering whether fear had made me ignore the moment that mattered most. My fingers tightened around the wine opener hidden inside my apron pocket. I leaned forward slightly, as though preparing to pour another glass. "Sir," I said softly, barely above a whisper, "when you leave, keep walking and do not stop." The words escaped before I could second-guess them. Vincent did not react immediately. He did not frown. He did not ask what I meant. He simply continued looking at me, completely still, as though weighing every syllable against something only he understood. Around the table, nobody else appeared to notice. One associate continued reading from a tablet. Another reached for bread. Only Vincent remained perfectly motionless. "Why?" he asked in the same calm voice. I swallowed. "Because I think someone is waiting outside." For the first time since entering the restaurant, I saw the smallest change in his expression. It was almost invisible. His eyes shifted by less than an inch toward the dining room window before returning to mine. Not fear. Recognition. Like a man receiving confirmation of something he had already suspected. He nodded once. "Thank you, Emily." My heart skipped. I had never introduced myself. I forced a smile that barely reached my lips. "Enjoy your evening." I turned before anyone could ask another question and walked toward the door with measured steps, resisting every urge to look back. The moment I stepped into the hallway, I finally released the breath I had been holding. My hands were shaking now. Had I just warned one of the most powerful men in the city based on nothing more than intuition and 3 strangers drinking cold coffee? I hurried toward the service station, trying to convince myself to focus on work again. Plates needed clearing. Desserts needed serving. Customers still smiled, laughed, celebrated birthdays, and complained about parking as though nothing unusual existed beyond the restaurant walls. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm of clinking glasses and quiet conversations, the atmosphere had shifted. Even without seeing him, I could feel that Vincent Moretti had heard every word. And somewhere beyond the rain-covered windows, 3 patient figures were still waiting for a door that might never open. I expected someone to laugh at me. I expected the restaurant manager to pull me aside and ask why I had interrupted an important guest with a strange warning built on nothing but instinct. Instead, nothing happened. The dining room continued moving to its familiar rhythm. Forks touched porcelain. Glasses clinked softly. A couple near the fireplace toasted their anniversary, while a little girl begged her parents for another slice of cheesecake. The ordinary sounds almost convinced me I had imagined everything. Almost. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. I carried another tray toward the kitchen when I noticed movement through the narrow glass panel leading to the private hallway. Vincent Moretti and his associates were leaving the dining room, but not the way they had originally entered. They were heading toward the main entrance instead of the rear exit. Nobody appeared hurried. Nobody looked alarmed. Vincent walked with the same calm confidence as before, his overcoat folded neatly over one arm, while one of his associates quietly stepped ahead to open the front door. The change was so natural that most customers never noticed it. I did. He had listened. The realization sent a strange mixture of relief and anxiety through my chest. Had I really changed his decision with a single whispered sentence? I stood frozen beside the dessert station as the front doors opened. Cold air swept briefly across the restaurant before disappearing again. Vincent walked outside without looking back. 2 black sport utility vehicles rolled smoothly to the curb almost at once, as though they had been waiting for the exact second he appeared. Within moments, they disappeared into the rain, their red taillights fading into the wet streets beyond the windows. Everything looked perfectly ordinary, until the back hallway erupted with confusion. One of the kitchen employees pushed through the swinging door, breathing harder than usual. "Who left the rear exit open?" he asked loudly. "The rain is blowing straight into the storage room." My manager frowned and hurried toward the hallway. Curious, I followed several steps behind without thinking. The emergency door still stood slightly open, allowing cold rain to splash across the concrete floor inside. Beyond the doorway, the loading dock was empty except for puddles shimmering beneath a security light. The 3 silent men were gone. So was the delivery van parked near the alley. My manager muttered something about careless delivery drivers before pulling the heavy door shut with a loud metallic click. Nobody else seemed interested. They returned to work almost immediately, but I remained standing there for another few seconds, staring at the rain running down the narrow window. They had been waiting. I knew they had. And when Vincent chose another exit, they disappeared without ever stepping inside. My heartbeat refused to slow. "Emily." I turned quickly. One of Vincent's associates stood quietly at the end of the hallway. I had not even heard him return. He was tall, clean-shaven, and dressed in the same tailored black suit, although now tiny drops of rain still clung to his shoulders. His expression remained polite but unreadable. "Mr. Moretti asked me to thank you." I blinked. "For what?" A faint smile crossed his face. "For noticing what others did not." Before I could answer, he reached into his jacket and handed me a simple ivory business card. There was no company logo, no address, only one name printed in elegant black letters. Vincent Moretti. Beneath it was a single phone number. "He also asked me to tell you something," the man continued. "He said that paying attention has a price. Please be careful going home tonight." He gave a respectful nod before walking away without another word. I stood alone in the quiet hallway holding the card between trembling fingers. Outside, thunder rolled once more across the Chicago skyline. For the first time all evening, I realized the danger I had been worrying about might not have disappeared with the rain. It might have quietly turned in my direction. I slipped the business card into the small pocket inside my apron, but I could still feel its weight against my chest for the rest of the shift. It was impossible for a single piece of cardstock to feel that heavy, yet every time I reached for my order pad, my fingers brushed against it and reminded me that my ordinary life had quietly drifted into unfamiliar waters. The restaurant finally emptied a little after 11. Chairs were turned upside down onto polished tables. The last candles were blown out one by one. My manager thanked everyone for surviving another busy Friday before disappearing into his office to finish payroll. Normally, I enjoyed the peaceful silence that followed closing time. Tonight, the silence felt different, larger somehow. I changed out of my apron, pulled on my light gray coat, and checked my phone. 2 missed calls from my younger sister, Sophie. 1 text asking if I was still coming over for breakfast the next morning. I smiled despite everything and quickly replied that I would be there by 9. For a few seconds, my life felt normal again. Family, bills, weekend plans. Then I pushed open the employee entrance and stepped into the cold night air. The storm had weakened into a gentle rain, leaving the sidewalks shining beneath rows of amber streetlights. Water dripped from building awnings while passing cars sent soft sprays across the pavement. My old blue Honda Civic waited 3 blocks away in the employee parking lot because downtown parking was far too expensive for waitresses living on tips. I pulled my hood over my hair and started walking. The city usually comforted me at night. People hurried home carrying umbrellas. Delivery drivers unloaded late shipments. Elevated trains rumbled overhead every few minutes. Tonight, those familiar sounds seemed farther away. I crossed one intersection and glanced behind me without thinking. Nobody. I laughed quietly at myself. Vincent's warning had worked better than any horror movie. Every shadow suddenly looked suspicious. Every stranger became a question instead of a person. I kept walking, repeating that thought until I almost believed it. Halfway to the parking lot, I stopped beneath the awning of a closed bookstore while waiting for the traffic signal to change. Across the street, a black sedan sat parked with its headlights off. There was nothing unusual about that except the engine remained running, sending small clouds of steam into the cool night air. As I waited for the light, the driver's side mirror shifted slightly. Someone inside had adjusted it. I looked away immediately, embarrassed that I had even noticed. The crosswalk signal flashed white. I continued walking without changing my pace. 2 blocks later, I entered the nearly empty employee parking lot. My Honda sat exactly where I had left it between a pickup truck and an aging delivery van. Relief washed through me. I had almost reached the driver's door when my phone vibrated. The unknown number displayed no name, only 10 unfamiliar digits. I hesitated before answering. "Hello." For a moment, there was only the quiet sound of rain. Then I heard the same calm voice from the restaurant. "Emily." My heartbeat instantly steadied. "This is Vincent Moretti. Do not unlock your car yet." I froze with my keys only inches from the door handle. "Why?" I whispered. "Because the blue sedan that has followed you since the bookstore parking lot is turning into your lot right now." Every muscle in my body went cold. Slowly, almost afraid to breathe, I lifted my eyes toward the entrance. Headlights swept silently across the wet pavement as a familiar dark sedan rolled through the open gate. Vincent spoke again before panic could take over. His voice never changed, never rose. "Stay exactly where you are. You are not alone." I stood completely still with my hand hovering inches above the car door handle, the cold metal key suddenly feeling heavier than anything I had ever held before. The parking lot around me no longer felt empty, even though nothing had physically changed except for the slow movement of headlights cutting across wet pavement. The blue sedan Vincent had mentioned rolled deeper into the lot with unhurried precision, its tires making almost no sound against the rain-soaked ground. My breath came in shallow intervals as I tried to convince myself to move, to do something, anything that would make sense. But my body refused to obey. The voice on the phone remained calm, steady, almost impossibly controlled. "Emily," Vincent said again, "do not go toward your car." I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "I am already at my car," I whispered. There was a brief pause, not of confusion, but calculation. "Then step away from it slowly, and do not turn your back on the sedan." My throat tightened. Every instinct I had ever learned about surviving difficult situations told me to run, but running felt like the worst possible option when I did not even know what I was running from. I took one careful step backward, then another. My eyes stayed locked on the approaching vehicle. It rolled forward at the same steady pace, neither speeding up nor slowing down, as if whoever was inside already knew exactly where I would move. The lot lights flickered slightly in the wind, casting uneven shadows across the asphalt. My old Honda Civic suddenly felt distant, like it belonged to another version of my life. "You are doing fine," Vincent said through the phone, his voice lowering slightly. "Do not look for faces. Just keep your distance." I nodded, even though he could not see me. "I do not understand what is happening," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The sedan stopped at an angle that placed it between me and the exit gate, not fully blocking it, but close enough that I would have to pass near it to leave. The engine idled quietly. No doors opened. No movement inside was visible through the tinted windows. Then, unexpectedly, another set of headlights entered the parking lot from the opposite direction. A black sport utility vehicle, sleek and unfamiliar, rolled in through the main gate and stopped near the far end of the lot. My heart jumped again, but this time there was something different about it. The SUV did not approach me. It positioned itself in a way that mirrored the sedan, creating a silent geometry between all 3 points: my location, the sedan, and the exit. "Emily," Vincent said, "you are not alone because you are being watched. You are not alone because you are being protected." The words should have comforted me. Instead, they made my confusion deepen. "Protected from what?" I asked. There was a brief silence before he answered. "From people who prefer their opportunities unseen." The sedan remained still. The SUV remained still. I stood in the center of both, suddenly aware that the rain had started falling harder again, each drop louder against my hood, as if marking time. My fingers loosened slightly around my keys. I realized I was no longer the one making choices about where to go. Something had already been decided long before I arrived at the parking lot. And for the first time since this night began, I understood that Vincent Moretti had not only been watching the danger around me. He had been anticipating it. I remember thinking that silence could be peaceful before that night, but standing between 2 parked vehicles that did not move like normal cars, I realized silence could also feel like pressure pressing against your skin. The rain had turned heavier again, sliding down my coat and dripping from the edge of my hood, but I barely felt it anymore. My attention was trapped in a narrow corridor of light between the black sedan in front of me and the SUV farther away. Vincent's voice returned through the phone, still steady, still controlled. "Emily, do not move toward either vehicle." I swallowed hard. "Then what am I supposed to do?" I asked quietly, trying not to let panic take over my words. There was a short pause before he answered. "You wait exactly where you are. And you listen to my voice only." The way he said it should have felt strange, even intrusive, but instead it anchored me in place. I exhaled slowly and forced my hands to stop shaking. The sedan remained completely still, its windows dark and unreadable. The SUV also did not move, positioned near the far edge of the lot like a shadow holding its breath. Between them, I stood in what felt like an invisible line that no one was willing to cross. "Vincent," I said softly, "why is this happening to me?" I heard the faint sound of movement on the other end of the call, like he had shifted his position or opened a door. "Because you saw something you were not supposed to see," he replied, "and because you chose to act when most people would not." His answer did not comfort me. but it made something inside me settle into a sharper awareness. I was not random in this situation. I was connected to something I did not yet understand. The sedan's brake lights flickered once, then went dark again. My breath caught. "Do not focus on the sedan," Vincent said immediately. "Focus on the far side of the lot." I obeyed without thinking. My eyes shifted toward the SUV. For the first time, I noticed something I had missed earlier. A second figure stood near the SUV, partially hidden under the glow of a distant streetlight. He was not moving, but he was watching. Not me directly. The sedan. As if waiting for something to respond. My chest tightened again. "There are more of them," I whispered. "Yes," Vincent answered calmly. "But they are not in control of this moment." I did not understand what he meant, but before I could ask, a new sound entered the space. Tires rolling slowly on wet pavement. Another vehicle, approaching from the exit gate behind me. My entire body stiffened. I turned my head just enough to see headlights reflecting off the rain-soaked ground. A third car had entered the lot. Black. Unmarked. It moved with the same quiet precision as the others, stopping at a distance that completed a triangle around me. I was no longer standing between 2 points. I was at the center of 3. My breathing became uneven again. "Vincent," I said, my voice barely steady. "There are 3 cars now." "I know," he replied. "Do not turn around." I realized I had almost done exactly that. I forced myself to stay still. The rain suddenly felt colder, heavier, like it was pressing down through my clothes. "Emily," Vincent said, his voice lowering slightly. "You are going to walk forward when I tell you. Not toward your car. Not toward the exit. Toward the center lane between the vehicles." I hesitated. "That is the most exposed position. It is also the safest," he replied immediately. There was no doubt in his tone. Only certainty. I closed my eyes for half a second and tried to steady my breathing. When I opened them again, the 3 vehicles remained in place, but the space between them felt like it was narrowing. "On my count," Vincent said. 3. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it over the rain. 2. I gripped my keys tightly in my hand. 1. I did not move immediately. My body froze between instinct and instruction, between fear and the strange trust one was beginning to place in a voice I had only heard through a phone. The rain felt heavier now, almost like it was trying to push me backward into my own hesitation. Then Vincent's voice cut through again, sharper this time, but still controlled. "Now, Emily." Something in his tone broke through my paralysis. I stepped forward. 1 step, then another. The moment I left the narrow space beside my car, the world around me seemed to shift. The 3 vehicles remained in place, but their alignment no longer felt like a trap tightening around me. It felt like something had been disrupted. The sedan in front of me did not advance. The SUV in the distance remained still. The third car near the exit gate held position. All 3 were waiting for something that was no longer happening. I kept walking slowly toward the center lane, exactly as Vincent had instructed. My breath came in uneven waves, but I forced myself to keep moving. "Good," Vincent said quietly through the phone. "Do not stop until you reach the center." I did as he said, stopping only when I was equidistant from all 3 vehicles. From here, I could see them more clearly. No faces were visible through the tinted windows, but I could feel attention directed at me from every angle. It was not visible. It was not spoken, but it was there. A pressure that made my skin feel too aware of itself. "What now?" I whispered. There was a pause before Vincent answered. "Now you stay exactly where you are, and you do not react to anything you see." I wanted to ask what that meant, but something in his voice told me not to interrupt. The rain softened slightly, becoming a steady, almost rhythmic sound against the pavement. For a few seconds, nothing changed. Then the sedan's headlights flickered once, as if someone inside had shifted their attention. The SUV mirrored the motion almost immediately, adjusting its position by a fraction of a turn. The third vehicle at the gate remained still, but I noticed its brake lights glow faintly, then fade. It was as if they were communicating without sound. "Vincent," I said carefully, "they are moving." "Not toward you," he replied instantly. "They are recalibrating." I frowned slightly. "Recalibrating what?" "The situation," he said. "You were never the target. You were the variable." I did not understand, but before I could respond, a new sound entered the lot. A 4th vehicle approached slowly from the opposite side of the exit lane. Unlike the others, it did not stop at a distance. It drove directly into the open space between them, forcing a change in all three positions at once. The sedan shifted slightly backward. The SUV angled away. The third car at the gate turned its headlights toward the new arrival. My heart pounded faster. "Vincent," I whispered. "There is another car." "I know," he said. "That is mine." The fourth vehicle stopped directly in front of me, headlights lowering automatically. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out under the rain, holding an umbrella but not using it. He looked calm, composed, and entirely focused on the surrounding vehicles rather than me. He gave a slight nod in my direction, then spoke into a small earpiece. I could not hear his words, but I saw immediate reactions in the other cars. The sedan's engine turned off. The SUV's headlights dimmed. The third vehicle near the gate began to reverse slowly. "Emily," Vincent said softly, "walk toward the car in front of you." I hesitated. "Is it safe?" "It is controlled," he replied. That was not the same as safe, but it was enough. I began walking forward again, my steps slow and uncertain. As I reached the passenger side of the fourth vehicle, the rear door opened from inside. Warm interior light spilled out into the rain. "Get in," Vincent's voice said calmly through the phone. I looked at the open door, then back at the three remaining vehicles as they gradually pulled away into the night, disappearing one by one into the rain-soaked streets. I took one final breath and stepped inside. I stepped into the vehicle slowly, my hand still trembling slightly as I pulled my coat tighter around me, as if fabric could somehow protect me from the weight of everything that had just happened. The door closed behind me with a soft, controlled sound that felt far too calm compared to the storm I had just walked through. Inside, the cabin was warm, dimly lit, and completely silent except for the faint hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of rain tapping against the roof. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe properly. Across from me, Vincent Moretti sat in the opposite seat, his presence filling the space without effort. He was no longer wearing the same expressionless calm from the restaurant. There was something different now, something quieter but more focused, as if a decision had already been made long before I ever stepped into the parking lot. He looked at me for a brief moment before speaking. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. "No, just confused." He nodded once, as if that answer was expected. The vehicle began to move smoothly, pulling away from the curb and merging into the rain-soaked street. Outside, Chicago blurred into streaks of gold and gray as we left the parking lot behind. I turned slightly to look out the window, expecting to see the three other vehicles, but they were gone. "Where did they go?" I asked softly. Vincent did not look outside. "They left because they were never meant to stay once I arrived." I frowned slightly. "So this was planned." He paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "What you saw was not an attack on you, Emily. It was a test of proximity. You were simply in the wrong place at the right time." I turned back toward him. "That does not make me feel better." A faint hint of something almost like understanding passed through his expression. It was not meant to. The car continued forward through the city streets, passing intersections glowing with reflections of neon signs and traffic lights shimmering on wet asphalt. My heartbeat slowly began to settle, but my mind refused to follow. "Why did you involve me at all?" I asked. Vincent's gaze shifted slightly toward the window, as if watching the city move past while thinking about something far beyond it. "Because you noticed what most people would ignore," he said. "And because you acted when most people would stay silent." I looked down at my hands, still cold despite the warmth inside the vehicle. "I am just a waitress," I said quietly. "You are someone who made a decision that changed the outcome of a situation you did not understand," he replied. There was no praise in his voice, only fact. The car slowed as it approached a quieter residential street. I recognized the area vaguely, far from the restaurant, far from downtown noise. Rows of apartment buildings stood under soft streetlights, their windows glowing faintly like scattered stars. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere you can rest," he said. The vehicle came to a gentle stop outside a small building with a covered entrance. Vincent finally looked at me directly. "Emily, tonight you did not just help a stranger," he said. "You interrupted something that would have continued without question if you had not been there." I felt my throat tighten slightly. "I did not think," I admitted. "I just reacted." He nodded once. "That is why you are still alive." The words hung in the air between us, not threatening, but heavy with meaning. I reached for the door. "Handle slowly." Before I opened it, I looked back at him. Is this going to be my life now? I asked quietly. Vincent studied me for a long moment, rain reflecting faintly in the window beside him. No, he said finally. That depends on what you choose next. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air, unsure whether I had just been rescued, recruited, or simply noticed by a world I had never meant to enter.